Hello my favourites, welcome back. Today we are going to be not reacting to a music video or any songs today, but I'm going to be reacting to how the Beatles changed music. So it's like, I'm not sure how long it is. It's a 25-minute video, basically in comparison to like their whole lifetime. A super quick little documentary on the backstory of the Beatles and just stuff I need to know, because I want to do, as I said, I want to do like a bunch of reactions to all of their albums, like in order. So I think some of you probably know because I was commenting it in like the little chat, whatever it is, but yeah. And don't mind this, I've got the hoodie back on because this morning was not a good morning. Mentally it was really bad because I was trying to book up another driving test and it wouldn't let me and it kicked me out of the little thing, so that was brilliant. But yeah, we're sitting here nice and comfy. Without further ado, let's go on with the video.
Liverpool, Merseyside, England, July 6, 1957. 16-year-old John Lennon meets 15-year-old Paul McCartney at a church garden party. Lennon's band, the Quarrymen, had just played a set, and Paul had been impressed enough to come up to chat with him. As it turns out, McCartney was a musician too, and performed a song for Lennon backstage.
I never knew this. At a church garden party. That's so cute.
Lennon was also impressed and asked McCartney to join the group as a rhythm guitarist. McCartney said yes. The two quickly got along due to their shared love for American rock and roll. In February 1958,
John Lennon was already in a band and then Paul joined it. Oh my god, that's so cool.
He invited his buddy George Harrison to watch the band. Harrison loved what he saw and also wanted in. After impressing the band with his amazing guitar skills, they enlisted him as lead guitarist. By January 1959, Lennon's buddies who had formed the original band were out of the picture, and it was just him, Paul, and George. They continued to perform, though, sometimes performing as Johnny and the Moondogs. Whenever they could find a random drummer, they would play a show. Meanwhile, Lennon had begun studying at Liverpool College of Art, and there he met a dude named Stuart Sutcliffe. They became friends, and Sutcliffe joined the band on bass. He was actually the one who convinced the band to change their name to Beatles. Yes, spelled that way. Later, they were the Silver.
I don't like the first spelling of it. Beatles. It's a bit, I don't know what to think of it. But that's so cool. I like how they weren't in like a friendship group to begin with, because I feel like a lot of bands are friends to begin with. Well, not all of them, of course, but some bands are like friends to begin with, and they just like all of them happen to be musicians and they just like form the band. But they were like picking each other from like random parts of the not of the country, but you know what I mean. They're like, oh, I'll have you. Oh, let's. You can join as well. I like that.
Beatles, then the Silver Beatles, and then finally just the Beatles. By August of 1960, it was around this time that they got a residency in the famous red light district of Hamburg, West Germany. They also got a drummer named Pete Best.
Okay,
for
girls.
the next 3.5 months, the now 5-piece band played lots of shows in Hamburg. Even though they were all back in Liverpool in early 1961, they'd be back to Hamburg several times over the next couple years. Around that time, Sutcliffe left the band to go back to school and pursue painting, and McCartney took over bass. Tragically, Sutcliffe would die from a brain hemorrhage the next year. Throughout 1961, the Beatles began to build up a following with the growing Mercy Beat movement. A producer named Bert Kaempfert hired the Beatles, now a 4-piece, to tour as Tony Sheridan's backing band for some recordings for Polydor Records. In November,
because I heard that someone commented that the Beatles like paid their dues basically, so they were playing in like the smaller pubs and whatever, like on a smaller scale to begin with before they got massive, rather than just like skyrocketing straight away. So they had so that's why they said that's why they're quite like natural on stage, because they had all that like previous experience with it. Let me go back. I wanted to go back because I missed that little bit. I kind of zoned out.
hired the Beatles, now a four-piece, to tour as Tony Sheridan's backing band for some recordings for Polydor Records. In November, a local record store owner and music journalist named Brian Epstein first saw them perform and was extremely impressed. By January 1962, he was their manager and was trying to get them out of their contract with Burt Kampfert. By May, they were free of that contract, and Epstein had already been arranging auditions for the Beatles with new record labels. Epstein and the Beatles were rejected by Columbia Records, HMV, High Records, Philips Records, Oriole Records, and others. The band auditioned for Decca.
I bet they were so angry when when the Beatles became like the best band in the world, like the biggest band in the world. I bet they were like, we should have signed them. Oh no, what have we done?
Who famously rejected them by telling Epstein that, quote, guitar groups are on the way out, and, quote, the Beatles have no future in show business. However, producer George Martin thought otherwise. He signed the band to EMI's Parlophone label. As the band began a recording session at EMI's Abbey Road Studios in June 1962, Martin complained about Best's drumming, saying it wasn't the best. I mean, he was best, but apparently not the best to Martin. Okay, that was bad, sorry. Ultimately, the Beatles had politely fired him from the band in August, replacing him with a dude named Richie Starkey, aka his stage name, Ringo Starr, who had previously...
I didn't realise that was his stage name, Richie Starkey, and then, well, not Richie Starkey, but, you know, the stage name Ringo Starr. I thought that was, like, his actual name. Does sound quite a bit cooler than Richie Starkey, but I quite like Richie Starkey at the same time. Ringo Starr. I like that. He did well with picking that name.
Drums for Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. The band recorded a few songs in September, and of those, Martin chose the song Love Me Do to be their first single, releasing it on October 5th, 1962. McCartney had actually originally written that song when he was 16, so yeah, 16. The Beatles' first single was written before the Beatles even existed.
That's
Love
so
Me Do
cool.
was a success, peaking at number 17 on the record retailer chart. The band made their first television appearance on the regional news show People and Places. By the end of 1962, Epstein had convinced the band to stop swearing and smoking on stage. Oh, and to dress more professionally on stage. The band had also convinced each other that they'd be better if everyone helped out with not only the singing, but also the songwriting. Although it'd mostly just be Lennon and McCartney doing most of the songwriting over the years. Parlophone released their second single, Please Please Me, on January 11th, 1963. This one was a bigger hit, reaching number one on both the New Musical Express and Melody Maker charts. On February 11th, the Beatles recorded 10 songs in one day for their debut LP.
10 songs? I bet they were shattered. I bet they were so tired.
It featured the hit single. Wait, did he say 10 songs in one day? Yes, I said 10 songs
that's
in
what
one
I just
day.
said.
They recorded them live and knew the songs well. George Martin was still in shock, saying, quote, I don't know how they do it. We've been recording all day, but the longer we go on,
my God.
the better they get. Parlophone released the album on March 22nd, 1963. By May, Please Please Me had hit the top of the United Kingdom album charts and stayed there for 30 weeks before being replaced by their next album. Yep, this is when Beatlemania began. Beatlemania describes the
Someone commented that as well. That's when Beatlemania began. Yeah, because there was this one video I saw. It's like, it went like viral on TikTok or whatever. But it was like one of the girls like proper fangirling over Paul. And she was like, oh, Paul, I think she was American, actually. She was like, Paul, I love you. I want to meet you, Paul, something like that. And I think he responded, and he's in his 80s now, I think. And he responded now, and it's so cute. I love it.
Popularity the Beatles experienced over the next few years, typically symbolized by screaming teenage girls chasing them around. The bigger they got, the crazier the hysteria and high-pitched screaming by their mostly young fans. Please Please Me had two more huge hits, From Me to You and She Loves You. Beatlemania went next level.
They were like the 60s boy band almost. Not the boy band, but you get what I mean. Like the band that the girls can fangirl over. And the band that the girls fangirled over when I was like I don't know, 9, whatever. I don't know, I was probably younger. Was like One Direction, but obviously it's completely different styles of music. Do you know what I mean? That's how it's like evolved over the years. It's crazy, like, because girls nowadays don't fangirl over them, and it's really sad.
Second album with the Beatles, which Parlophone released on November 22nd, 1963. It eventually became just the second album in the United Kingdom to sell 1 million copies and stayed at the top of the album charts for 21 weeks. Though the album had no singles, it was even more critically acclaimed than their debut album, and also featured Harrison's first recorded solo composition. Oh yeah, and this was the album that described them as the, quote, fabulous foursome in the liner notes, and thus the Fab Four nickname was born. While the Beatles were huge in Europe, that success didn't quite translate to the United States. But that
I was going to ask about that. I was wondering, like, when are they going to get big in the US? Because obviously, big in the UK, not big in the US straight away, I don't think.
Their single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which Capitol Records released in the United States the day after Christmas of 1963. The song was the band's first American #1 hit. In January, VJ released Introducing the Beatles, and Capitol released both Meet the Beatles and
Shout. I remember we had to, in year 6, which is like junior school, I don't know what it is in the US, I'm not sure, but yeah, in year 6 we had, I think I was probably like 12, I think I must have been 11 or 12, and we did like a whole singing show or whatever of the Beatles, and we're like, twist and shout, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, baby, now come on and work it all out. And we had to do that, and we like sing on stage, and all of our parents watched. It was so cute.
Twist and Shout in North America. These 3 albums had stuff from the Beatles' first 2 albums, but also some other gems. And then, on February 9th, 1964, one of the most famous television performances in history.
All the teenage girls.
The Beatles made their American television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show to a screaming, wild crowd.
Oh,
73 million people.
It's just like girlhood, isn't it? It's just so cute. All of us can just fangirl over all these bands. I love it.
45% of all American television viewers saw the live performance. It was clear
crazy.
that Beatlemania had crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and soon other British bands like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and the Zombies would as well, in what became known as the British Invasion. One thing I should probably
the British Invasion. The Beatles started this, guys.
Before we go on, most young Americans didn't have haircuts like this in early 1964. This hairstyle ended up becoming a subtle symbol of rebellion for a growing youth culture. Capitol suddenly realized they had
That haircut is what makes them so unique, though. Like that's what everyone remembers them for, like that, or not just the haircut. As I said, don't take everything I say so literally, because some of you in the comments like take everything I say so literally, but the haircut, I just think it was such like a statement almost, because it's like you can recognize them from the haircut.
Hands, and in the spring hurried to throw together another release to make some money. The Beatles' second album, even though it was not technically their second album, and in fact their third album released in the United States. The label also quickly released the Beatles' Long Tall Sally exclusively in Canada. All of these thrown together albums were hugely successful. By April, the Beatles had 14, that's right, 14 songs on Billboard's Hot 100 singles charts all at once. Around that time, United Artists Records gave the Beatles a deal to make 3 movies. Yep.
Movies as well.
Actors.
No, I didn't know this. I didn't know they were in a movie. Oh, movies.
Musical comedy based off what they were really experiencing, called A Hard Day's Night, and was a smash hit, of course. The soundtrack for the film was officially their 3rd studio album, released on July 10th, 1964.
I need to watch that now.
4 singles.
If anyone wants me to watch their movies, let me know. Let me know in the comments and I'll watch them. I'll react to them.
I'll Cry Instead, and I Love Her, and even the instrumental version of And I Love Her. And then Capitol Records was like, hey, we need some more money. We haven't released a Beatles album for a couple months. And threw some more songs together to release something new on July 20th, 1964. The band toured heavily that summer, playing 37 shows over 27 days around the world. In August, the Beatles began a big tour of North America.
I'd be so dead at the end of that. I'd just be like, get me home, get me into my hoodie, let me sleep. I need some sleep, girls. I was wondering as well, did the Beatles write all of their own songs, or did they get other people to write their songs as well? Like, was it a mixture, or did they literally just write all of their own songs? Because I don't know.
On that tour that they got to meet Bob Dylan.
Bob.
He introduced them to his friend Cannabis. Dylan ended up having a big influence on the band's later music. Also on that tour, the band found themselves confronting racial segregation in the American South. They threatened to not play a show in Jacksonville, Florida after hearing the audience would be segregated, and due to this, city officials gave in and agreed to allow an integrated audience.
On
December 4th, Parlophone released Beatles for Sale.
I like that they stuck up for that. It shows they've got good morals.
Fourth studio album. As the name of the album suggests, it kind of showed the rising conflict between the pressure to keep selling records and keep up their creativity. It actually featured songs not about love on it, and even offered a bit of cynicism.
Yeah, because if they're sorry, I keep pausing, but if they're constantly like being told by the record label, right, you need to keep batch producing like a bunch of different songs, like all the time, it's going to end up like not only just mentally and physically draining them, but also they can't really put their own spin on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, they can put their own spin on it, but if they're constantly being pressured by the record label, you need to do this at a set time to make more money, it kind of loses that authenticity around it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
Hit number 1 on the UK albums chart. Capitol released Beatles 65 a couple weeks later, which featured most of the songs off Beatles for Sale. In April 1965, John Lennon and his wife Cynthia and George Harrison and his girlfriend Patty Boyd were hanging out with George's dentist, John Riley. Riley apparently secretly...
Wait, let me go back. I was just looking at them. I didn't even listen to what was going on. All right.
George Harrison and his girlfriend Patty Boyd were hanging out with George's dentist, John Riley. Riley apparently secretly added LSD to their coffee. Boy, was that a surprise trip for the bunch. Regardless, after this, Lennon and Harrison would be regular users of the drug.
No!
And McCartney also tried it with them. You'll notice that 1965 marks a more dramatic beginning of a shift in their music.
People were commenting this as well, that some of their stuff is like heavily, not inspired, but some of their stuff was written when they were like, you know. So, but apparently that's like some of the really good stuff. So, like some of the really good songs, so I could listen to them as well.
They never would abandon making just flat-out darn catchy songs. On June 14th of that year, Capitol Records released another compilation to continue cashing in North America called Beatles 6, even though it was their 7th Beatles release. That same month, Queen Elizabeth sparked controversy by appointing all 4 Beatles members of the Order of the British Empire. Later that summer, the band starred in their second film, Help. The soundtrack to that film would be their 5th studio album, released on August 6, 1965. Although the whole album is a classic that got tons of perfect reviews, the 3 biggest hits off of it were the title track, Ticket to Ride, and Yesterday. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, Yesterday remains the most covered song in history. The movie was another comedy that followed the group as they struggled to record a new album, all while logically protecting Ringo from a cult and a pair of mad scientists. The band toured regularly promoting the album, playing one of their most famous shows on August 15th at New York's Shea Stadium to a record crowd of 55,600 people. In September, ABC began airing a Saturday morning cartoon.
I don't know how many people. They played to over 55,000 people. Is that like the most amount of people that have ever like fit in a stadium that someone's like a band has played for? Or like what's the highest amount? Or is that the highest? Is like that the record? Or is that just the record for them? I don't know. They didn't specify. Let me know.
It was the first weekly show to feature animated versions of real living people. In October, George Martin and the band decided that instead of just making albums that were really just a collection of singles, they were going to focus on making a complete album. Also, for the first time in their entire careers, they were able to take their time recording, free of tour, radio, or film commitments. The result was a masterpiece. Good. Rubber Soul, their sixth studio album, released on December 3rd, 1965. Critics...
It'd be so much better that they've actually got time to put, and the effort, and do you know what I mean? Just everything, like a clear head, clear mind, just to put everything into an album. So that's I guess that's what they're saying, is the album was, instead of like being a collection of singles, it's a whole album like carefully put together, if you know what I mean.
Praised the album, of course, saying it marked a new threshold of complexity and maturity of the band's sound. Later, Lennon joked this was, quote, the pot album.
Rubber Soul.
The band was regularly smoking pot while recording it. Many fans say this explains the dramatic change of direction of Rubber Soul, an album that was folkier, featured new instruments, brighter guitar tones, and complex...
I mean, if it gives a good album, go for it, guys. Not saying do that, but I mean, I want to listen to the album. I want to listen to the album.
Arrangements. Some of the bigger hits on the album included We Can Work It Out, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, and Michelle. In March 1966, the evening...
Oh! Let's not do that.
Standard, a London-based newspaper, published an interview with John Lennon. Lennon would later cause quite a bit of controversy when he said, quote, "We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity." Well, those words would haunt the band throughout the rest of the year. Lennon implying the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, even though the comment was taken out of context, led to protests, death threats, and the public burning of the band's...
Like, I don't think they meant it in a bad way. I don't think they meant it in a bad way, but I can definitely see how that was taken out of context and everyone... Do you know what I mean? A lot of people take things very literally and see it as it is rather than actually interpreting what it could have meant or what it actually means. They just see it for face value and they're like, right, this is not on...
To add to their controversy, on June 20th, Capitol released another compilation album called Yesterday and Today with this controversial cover. Despite this,
oh my god, I didn't even look at that. I was reading the subtitles because I had the subtitles on because I can listen to something for so long, but then I have to read it as well because I get distracted.
Fans continue to come to their shows.
In
fact, those screaming fans were so loud that the band had a hard time hearing themselves.
I want to go back to that cover. What was bad about it? It was like, was it dolls? Oh, it's like dismantled dolls. What is that? What is that on? Is that like meat? Looks like, what is that, like body parts? I don't know. It's like dolls and red things.
Released another compilation album called Yesterday and Today with this controversial cover. Despite this, hundreds of thousands of screaming fans continue to come to their shows. In fact, those screaming fans were so loud that the band had a hard time hearing themselves playing.
I mean, you're doing something right if you can't even hear yourself playing because everyone loves you.
Performing live, and that these live shows were no longer about the music anyway, influenced them to decide to make their tour for their upcoming album, Revolver, their last
I like that
tour
cover.
ever. Revolver, released on August 5th, 1966,
That's really cool.
and the band's seventh studio album, continued
Love
the
that.
experimental trend that Rubber Soul started. It was another masterpiece,
Yay!
featuring a dive into psychedelic rock, and again featuring complex arrangements that pushed popular music forward in a completely new direction. Basically, the Beatles were at the top of their game, and everyone else was playing
Everyone
catch-up.
else is
Many
just
music critics have said
nothing
it is
compared
literally
to
the
them.
greatest album of all time. The cover of Revolver was even radically different. Two of the bigger hits on the album were Eleanor Rigby and Paperback Writer, which even had a music video made for it. It was one of the earliest music videos. The
Oh my
Beatles
God.
played their last concert before a paying audience at San Francisco's Candlestick Park on August 29th, 1966. After 4 years of non-stop touring and more than 1,400 concerts, they were now a studio band. They went back to Abbey Road Studios in November, and this time took their own
So
sweet
they
time
just-
recording, wanting to make their...
So they spend so much time doing live shows that they just wanted to come back and kind of channel their creativity again, I guess.
most experimental and well-produced record yet. And take their time they did, spending over 700 hours in the studio, 55 hours of that on just one song,
Wow.
Strawberry Fields Forever. However,
So that's
that
what I'm
song
saying.
didn't
They
make the
can
cut.
literally put so much time into like specific parts that it's gonna be, it naturally would be better.
What would become their 8th studio album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club
See, look at that album.
released on
It's
May
so
26,
cool.
1967. To say this was another masterpiece is almost an understatement. Remember how I said that many music critics said Revolver is the greatest album of all time? Well, many music critics also have said Sgt. Pepper's is the greatest album of all time.
So it's like...
The album's cover is certainly among the most famous of all time. It was the first album to print the lyrics of every song in the artwork. It might have
So it's like a battle between which albums were the best. I'm not sure.
handedly both started progressive rock and the entire 1960s counterculture movement. It made the concept album
Green Day.
popular. Simply put, it literally
Pink
changed
Floyd.
pop music forever. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band remains the United Kingdom's best-selling studio album.
Yeah.
On June 25th,
I need to buy it.
1967, the Beatles performed a new single, All You Need Is Love, to, just 350 million people via the first ever
Only
live
350
global television link.
million
That
people.
song ended up becoming a flower power anthem, by the way, sung by hippies at Vietnam War protests around the world. Tragically, on August 27th, the band received news that their manager, Brian Epstein, had died of a drug overdose at the young age of 32.
Oh, bless
This
him.
devastated the band and seriously made their future uncertain. In fact, they were so lost after Epstein's death that they made a crappy movie where they filmed themselves touring the country in a psychedelic bus with a random cast of strange characters. Well, that film, called Magical Mystery Tour, was the first project the Beatles ever did that critics completely trashed, calling it, quote, blatant rubbish.
Yeah, but to be fair, I don't think critics should have even had a say, because after losing someone that's so close to you and that's actually, do you know what I mean, helped the band so much that they had a connection with, and he's just passed away. They were lost, obviously. They were lost, so they don't know what to do with themselves. So they do that, and then everyone's slating them for it. I don't think that's on, to be fair.
And a, quote, witless home movie. However, the soundtrack to the film of the same name, released on November 27th, 1967, was praised by critics and another
Oh, good.
commercial success. Meanwhile, the band had been spending more and more time following the guru Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. In February 1968, they even traveled to Rishikesh, India, to hang out with
so
him and attend his
cool.
seminars on transcendental meditation. Starr and McCartney didn't stay there as long as Lennon and Harrison, though, and this ultimately caused some tension in the band. In the spring, Lennon came back to London and began to heavily use more damaging drugs like heroin, and left his wife Cynthia for his new infatuation, a young artist named Yoko Ono. For the next 2 years, Yoko Ono was always by his side, to a point where it even further added tension
This
to
is
the
what I
band.
was wondering
Still,
about. If anyone saw my other video, this is what I was wondering about with Lennon, I was wondering about him and Yoko and what it was like, because obviously I'd only heard like certain parts of their relationship. So let's listen.
On May 14th, 1968, Lennon and McCartney appeared on The Tonight Show to announce their new multimedia company called Apple Corps. Get it? Like Apple Corps? They launched the conglomerate to help new artists, but ultimately its record label, Apple Records, would be just a creative outlet for the Beatles. On July 17th, a somewhat trippy animated film featuring the band called Yellow Submarine premiered at theaters in London. In October, the band finished up recording a huge batch of new songs, so huge that they would make up a double album. Double album, in fact. Simply called The Beatles, their ninth studio album would eventually just be known as the White Album because, well, look at it. It had no graphics or text other than the band's name. They released it on their own label on November 22nd, 1960.
Different, like, do you know what I mean? Just a white album cover, literally called the White Album, and then compared to all of their other albums that were so almost like alternative and quite hippie and quite colourful, and then it's just blank.
The recording process was again long and drawn out, and the members of the band increasingly found themselves getting annoyed with each other, even showing up on different days to record different parts. In fact, just 16 of the album's 30 songs have all 4 band members performing, even though there were no official singles off the album. 2 of the bigger hits on it included Obla Di, Obla Da, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. It was another masterpiece, praised by most critics, by the way. Oh, and of course, eventually sold millions.
But they're bound to get annoyed with each other, though. They've been like literally living in each other's pockets for however many years, and do you know what I mean? It's normal in bands, especially because it's just there's almost that added pressure as well, especially being like the greatest band ever. Like the amount of pressure that they must have been under is ridiculous.
May 13th, 1969, did they release the soundtrack to the movie released the previous year, Yellow Submarine. It was their 10th studio album, and only got mixed reviews, mostly because the Beatles kind of just threw some leftover songs on it. On Billboard's album chart, the Yellow Submarine soundtrack reached number 2, just behind the White Album, which held at the number 1 position. Around that time, McCartney really wanted the Beatles to start playing live again, believing all this studio work was hurting the band's chemistry. The rest of the band kind of agreed and went along with the idea of touring again. However, rehearsals often did not go well. Sure, Yoko Ono famously got a lot of the blame for distracting Lennon, but all 4 of the Beatles were distracted. January 1969 was actually a busy month for the band. In addition to rehearsals, they started recording some songs how they used to in the early years. On January 30th, 1969, the band, along with soul musician Billy Preston, played a surprise concert right on top of the Apple headquarters in London. The 42-minute set would be the last public performance by the Beatles. Yep, they soon abandoned the idea of touring again. In late February, they decided to record a
So they were gonna like start touring a lot more, and then they did the live performance, and they decided no more, no more live performances. And I got a few comments of people saying that the coats they were wearing were actually like their partner's coats, like their wife's coats. I didn't even know that, but I mean, it makes sense now.
Songs the way they recorded the White Album. Recording sessions would occur sporadically over the next few months. Preston often joined them, becoming another 5th Beatle. As the months went on, it was clear that the band was drifting further and further apart. The last time that all 4 members worked together under the same roof was recording their song The End on August 18th, 1969. The End? Huh. Yeah, that fits. By the end of 1969, each member already had their own solo projects going in full swing. Lennon was the first to officially leave the band, privately telling them on September 20th. But the general public didn't know this. 6 days later, the band released their 11th studio album, Abbey Road, which had this legendary cover where they are crossing,
Abbey Road was the
Abbey Road, taken just outside Abbey Road Studios. The album was another huge success, but got mixed mixed reviews from critics. George Harrison finally got some praise for this one with the 2 hits he wrote, Something and Here Comes the Sun. Within 3 months, Abbey Road had sold 4 million copies, but by that time, the remaining 3 members barely saw each other. They did have a bunch of recordings from before the Abbey Road sessions they wanted to release, though. They recorded one last song together in January called I, Me, Mine. The legendary producer Phil Spector came in to help that spring put a new album together. It would be their last. On April 10th, 1970, the Beatles formally announced their breakup.
It was like
A
inevitable.
month later, they released their 12th and final studio album, Let It Be. They also released a documentary of the same name a few days later. That film followed them around during their struggles in the final months of the band, with a highlight being footage of their famous rooftop concert from the previous January. Let It Be was a commercial success, with the hit ballads The Long and Winding Road and the title track. But this one definitely got some more negative reviews. News of the breakup of the Beatles devastated fans around the world. But fortunately
I bet
for them,
everyone was
all
like crying
four
for
of them
days,
have thriving careers
weeks.
as solo artists and with other bands. All of them had hits
I think
at
it's
some
also
point or
good though
another.
that
but
I think they kind of like they knew it was coming to an end, but they made the most of the time that they were together. But I think it's good that they went on to have their own solo careers, because it's almost like we had this and that was amazing, but we need to find our own kind of route in the industry, if you know what I mean. Like, we've created something so successful, but it's not working anymore, and that's okay. But we can now do other things that are still good. Do you know what I mean? I always say that. Do you know what I mean?
releases of the Beatles would always overshadow their work. An insane fan murdered John Lennon outside of his...
Just quickly, I know I paused at the wrong time, but I'll forget what I was going to say otherwise. When you create something so good, it's kind of hard to top that with anything else. It's like with Harry Potter, a lot of the actors, I know it's completely unrelated, but in Harry Potter, with a lot of the actors, that was their best thing because it was so big, it was so amazing that anything they did in their kind of like away, in their careers away from Harry Potter was almost, it was still good, but it was never going to be the same standard.
Building on December 8th, 1980.
Oh, it was a fan. It was a fan that murdered John Lennon. What the heck? Why? I never knew. I need to go back. I never knew that it was a fan.
With other bands. All of them had hits at some point or another, but the releases of the Beatles would always overshadow their work. An insane fan murdered John Lennon outside of his apartment building on December 8th, 1980. George Harrison died from lung cancer on November 29th, 2001. Paul McCartney died in 1966. Just kidding. He's still kicking it. In fact, both he and Ringo Starr are still performing and releasing music, and
Paul
recently reunited to record a song that John Lennon wrote the last year of his life,
Paul is
and
living
played
his
a couple
best
songs
life
live together last summer in Los Angeles. Though there were many Beatles compilations and films released in the decades since the band broke up, a couple big ones of note were the Beatles Anthology and One. The Beatles Anthology was a television documentary set of double albums and a book that examined the history of the band in way more depth than this video has. Oh, and McCartney, Harrison, and Starr were involved with the whole process. One was a compilation of all the band's #1 singles. It came out November 13th, 2000, and ended up being the best-selling album of the decade, eventually selling more than 31 million
Wouldn't expect
copies.
anything less.
Wanted to get guitars, get in a band, because we didn't really have proper jobs at the time. Anyway, it sort of turned out fine, and
Just
it's got a bit bigger than any of us expected.
So, of course, the Beatles were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but also all 4 individual members have been inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right, my phone literally died 2 minutes. How long? No, literally a minute before it was going to end, and I was so scared. I went downstairs, put it on charge, and I checked on like my gallery or whatever, wherever the video is, and it wasn't there. And I was like, don't you dare tell me I've just lost all of that footage, like 40 minutes worth of footage. don't you dare tell me I've just lost that. And I couldn't find it, so I resorted to the first option, which was crying. Yes, I cried for about 10 minutes because today's not been a good day, and that was like the cherry on top of the pile of turds. But I found it, so it's fine. This video, yeah, I can put the video out now, so I'm happy. Thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe down below, and yeah, leave any of your facts in the comments because I like hearing all of them. And yeah, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.